Monday. We're back at it. Weekend was good. Had a restful Sabbath and did a little planning on Sunday. Watched the NFL games and made sure the week was set up for success. Mondays we have one of our more important meetings of the week, in my opinion. We have what we call our skunk meeting, which is essentially the most senior leaders in the company. There's only 5 of us total. We meet, and it's somewhat of a fluid format, and we just kind of discuss what we feel are the most important things going on at the company right now. We used to have more leaders in this forum. It would be like 8 to 10, as we had our directors involved and more ranks. But what we learned over time is that there's varying levels of context across different levels of seniority, no matter really how well you try to diffuse information throughout the org. And, decisions need to be made increasingly quicker. So what we did was we separated out our loop leads format, which is probably 10 people, which includes our directors and, rising managers in the company. We separated that out from the skunk, which used to be pretty small. It was just the C-suite, 2 co-CEOs and 1 CTO. What we learned there is we didn't have sufficient representation to make sure everybody in the org, or make sure every aspect of the organization is represented if we just had the 3 of us. So we elevated our vice president of insurance ops, which pretty much Madi runs all operations. So in her, we can represent claims, underwriting, sales, customer care, which is a pretty big chunk of our operations. It is the operations. And then we have our head of growth, who represents kind of marketing, paid spend. And so between the 5 of us, we have the whole org there. So every Monday at around 10 a.m. or 11 a.m., we meet and we just discuss the most pressing things. I think it's a great forum because you don't have to be so structured in the meeting. We're all senior enough that we don't necessarily need a specific agenda to keep us on topic. We can just kind of talk about what's top of mind, and in our case, we know that whatever is top of mind for us is probably pretty important for the org, just given how senior we are. So that's today. The rest of Mondays, and that's like an hour and a half, but it usually brings about pretty important things that will then look to do. Rainy day here. It doesn't rain a lot in Austin, but sometimes it does. It's also my last week in Austin, so some personal things going on as well, in the sense that I'm preparing to move, we're subletting the office, and just in general, I've been here for not a long time, but 3 years, and having to move cross state is a lot. So this week I'll probably also have that going on in the background. And yeah, I would say, my yoga teacher had talked about how nothing in nature thrives in the winter. It is nature's natural circadian rhythm to hibernate, to rest, to gather in the wintertime, so that in the spring you go about and you thrive. And she had argued that humans, obviously we belong to the animal kingdom, and so we are naturally susceptible to this circadian rhythm that occurs. And I would agree. it's darker in the morning. It's, you don't want to get up. Um, and, it's not, you're not, I find that I'm not as naturally motivated in the winter time, as certainly as compared to like spring, fall, especially. Um, and, I've been doing this a long time, and these lulls, they're important to work through these lulls, and this is where discipline comes in. I'm not particularly motivated at the moment. um, I haven't lost the passion, I haven't lost the love, but motivation kind of comes and goes, and it's especially important to just stay disciplined in this time. You get in the lab anyway, you do the work anyway, and you keep the momentum going, and that's especially important um, when you're a leader, whether of a team or organization or really anything, because that tone is coming from the top. And so I think it is okay to have that grace and that acknowledgement that you can't be on 100 all the time, and not only not every day, but certainly, but also comparatively not every quarter. But it is important to just keep your foot down and keep making progress, because it all compounds and it turns into pretty big advantages down the stretch. So, looking forward to our meeting with our skunk team. We, tend to have really great, productive discussions, and it typically will unearth very important things that we kind of got to get working on ASAP. So, that's what's on the docket today. Mostly that. The rest is I try to reserve the back end of Mondays for um, administrative stuff, paperwork. I got a long to-do list, so I'll definitely check in with you guys a little bit later. But typically Tuesdays through Thursdays is kind of when it's meeting heavy. So Mondays and Fridays for me are meeting light. They're generally reserved for more time to actually do work and catch up on stuff. So cool. See you guys later. Skunk meeting done. Went really well. Everybody always comes with great insights. Um, if you don't have at least one meeting where you don't have a lot of structure, I highly recommend trying it. It doesn't work if it's too big of a meeting, though. If you have a lot of people and it's unstructured, it's going to be a waste of time. So the bigger the meeting is, the more structured. Also, it's fine to have specific meetings with very specific intents and driving specific outcomes. Those should be structured. But if you don't have unstructured time with your most senior leaders in your company, I think you're doing yourself a disservice, because you can really only plan but for so much. But really just having that fluidity in the dialogue and throwing things out and saying, wait, let's just hang out here for a second, and you dive deep, or this is the skunk team is the team that's kind of ahead of the whole rest of the org. And we can stress test ideas, we can come up with ideas before we introduce it to the rest of the org, we can come up with an idea, validate it, and then introduce it to the rest of the org. There's a lot of ways that you can kind of go about it, but highly recommend unstructured time. And that's probably the team. Not probably. That's the team that has the most context, the most information in the whole org. They have visibility on our runway. They have visibility on our key risks, our key opportunities, the key bets that we're deciding to take. And what's really great about getting at least a few executives up to speed on your thinking is that you can't see it all, but no one else can see either if they don't have the information. So by having a few people with maximum information, you can just round out your perspective, and it gets to a place where they can just think of great ideas and projects and things to work on and risks to elevate, because they have all the context. Highly recommend it. Took us a while before we kind of created this forum, so if you implement it early in your startup, in your business, then I think you'd be ahead of the curve. And then the last thing I'd say there is, it's got to be a mixture of people that are most talented, but also most committed to the org. Um, it doesn't really work when someone whose commitment is wavering or you're not sure that they're looking to stick around is there. It needs to be people that are fully bought in and have they're senior enough too. So yep, those are my tips for a good skunk meeting. You can call it whatever you want, but that's what we call it, and that's why I like it, and it's super helpful. Those 2 hours, we ended up doing probably an hour and a half, 2 hours, which you can look at as kind of a expensive meeting, but man, I just get the most clarity and the most conviction from those 2 hours, and I like it on Mondays because it sets the tone for the week. So um, that's what I have. Off to do some office work. Got my admin work done, all set up for the week and really for the rest of the quarter. What we've been doing is we're making this the quarter where we are fully optimized and ready for the rest of the year. So what does that mean in practical terms? Well, one, as you've been hearing me talk about all vlog long, is be in a cost optimized place. So your fixed cost, so how much it costs you to run the business, can either work for you or against you. If your fixed cost is too high relative to your income, then you're pretty much never going to reach profitability. But if you can lower your fixed cost and essentially trade that budget, that operating budget, and invest that money into growth every month, okay? So instead of, let's say your fixed cost is $500K a month or $100K a month or whatever it is. Let's go with 500 for easy numbers. And I know that's high for like a non-venture backed company, but for a venture backed business, it's fairly standard. So if you can bring your fixed cost by being creative and renegotiating deals, finding automations, going offshore for engineering support and so on. If you can reduce that fixed cost from 500K to 100 to 400K, so you save $100,000 a month, you shouldn't just hold on to that money, right? As tempting as that may be, what you actually should do is invest that money into marketing, because every dollar spent in marketing, you get that money back at some point. Okay? Now, how long depends on what's called your payback period. Your payback period is essentially the calculation of your customer acquisition cost divided over your revenue. I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, but let me just explain it in a non-formulaic way. It's every customer you acquire has a cost, and then they produce only a certain amount of revenue every month. And so at what point do you break even? If you want to be very technical about it, you can also layer in the churn rate. So if all businesses kept 100% of their customers, then all businesses would be very successful. But the reality is, we and other businesses all have churn rate. So you might lose 10% of customers in your first month, 5% of customers in your next month, and so on. So in order to get a truly accurate sense of your payback period, what you have to do is you layer in your customer acquisition cost, all of your hidden costs to service that business. So credit card processing, administrative stuff, you run reports, and then your churn on top. And the net amount, that is what you use to inform your payback period. So for Loop, we get paid back in about 6 months, which is one term. We sell a 6-month car insurance policy. So that whole first term, we're essentially running at a slight loss. And then upon renewal, that customer then yields profit for us. So all businesses will have different payback periods. Some enterprise SaaS companies have payback periods as long as 2 years, but they have very sticky contracts and their lifetime value is 10 years, right? USAA's average lifetime span for their members is 25 years. Geico is 5 years. So when you're early, you don't really have enough data around how long a customer sticks around on average. We estimate that on average, a customer will stick around 1.5 to 2 years. We can work on improving that. But we're a young company. We have limited data from people that have stuck around that long. So what you want to do is focus on, that's what you call a lag indicator, right? So that's the most important measure, your lifetime value, but that's also the longest one it takes to prove out. So every lag indicator has a lead indicator. So that's like almost a distillation of that particular measure that you can measure more frequently and much more upfront. So for example, if retention is the lag measure, and you're measuring retention on a 6-month basis, you can measure your 30-day retention. Okay, so what percentage of customers stick around after 30 days and then after 60, 90, and so on. So every lag measure has a lead measure. So, okay, all that to say that if your fixed cost is 500 and you lower it by 100 and you get it down to 400, you don't want to just sit on that cash, because then that cash is just sitting there idle. You want to take that cash, invest it into marketing, and that's only if you have a well-oiled customer acquisition machine, right? We know to the dollar exactly how much it costs us to acquire a customer, what it costs us to service that customer, and what our churn is on an actualized basis, which means we're not guessing. We have actual data going back probably 24 months at this point. And so with confidence, we know if we invest this dollar today, if we invest 100K today, you get 100K back in 9 months, in 6 months. So for us, the game is lowering the fixed costs as much as possible with all these initiatives that we have that we're planning. And you know, in 2023, we did layoffs and stuff like many other businesses. So there's really only so much room that you can find in personnel. At some point, you have to begin optimizing in other areas, and sometimes those optimizations are the bets that you don't take, right? So sometimes I think we learned we have a couple of different bets going on at once, and you can actually forego a few of those bets, only focus on the most important one. And the less bets you're making, the less resources you have to allocate to them, and you can recoup that capital. And so if you think about it, it doesn't sound like a lot, that 100K a month, but remember, if you get your money back in 6 months, well, what happens after that? Well, anything after that is profit. So what you're doing is you're originating a cohort of customers and a cohort of contracts, a cohort of revenue that the sooner you begin it, the sooner you get not only to break even, but to profit. So by that estimate, 100K that you save here in Jan, and then Feb, and then March, and then April, you're investing those monies and you're originating a new cohort of revenue, and those begin to compound on top of your already very seasoned cohorts, which are your first group of customers. You start layering on all these month by month, these cohort of customers that come in the door. So that's kind of a lot of in the morning in the skunk session, we kind of planned those initiatives, and we had already had those mapped out, but we kind of agreed in what direction we were going to go. And then, immediately afterwards, you get that, there's really no delay in time in a startup between decision and action. We decided on these things, boom, we're in action. Some of these require picking up the phone, calling lawyers, calling partners, different things like that. We're in the middle of subletting our office space. I'm following up on that deal because that's part of it, right? We pay a certain amount to have this office space that, I think was at one point we decided would be valuable if we were going to be in person. But the smaller a team we became, the more distributed we became, and the less we decided that it's necessary to be in the office. So if we can sublet that and recoup the capital every month, I'll just take that and invest that into marketing. So at this point, we're just looking for any and all room, not so much so that it compromises the actual business itself. I think that's a mistake we made in the past where, if you cut your staff too lean and you still have the customers that you have to service, then people just feel overworked and they don't want to work there anymore. So what we're finding is you want to be sufficiently invested in your personnel, sufficiently invested in your capability to deliver your product or service. And we want to be very judicious about the bets that we're making into the future. All right, so it's what we call forward development, right? We really want to limit that. I think before a mistake we made is we had way too much forward development going on. We had forward development for this, forward development for that, future initiatives this. We were saying no to nothing, right? And what happens is you invest a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there. Before you know it, death by a thousand paper cuts. You're over invested into a bunch of things, and probably only a small percentage of those things are really making, a big impact to your business. So what we're doing, again, is investing sufficiently on the personnel side, divesting from certain initiatives, and only investing on the key bits. The savings that we can generate from that, you take that and you invest it into marketing. And that's kind of the counterintuitive part that is very specific to venture capital. I think most other businesses would rather just save those monies and stash it away. But in actuality, if you're not growing, you're dying. You're just dying a little bit more slowly if you're just hoarding the cash. But you got to be on offense in this game. And with more and more production, eventually you'll produce sufficient revenues to offset your fixed costs altogether. And then you're running a profitable operation. And then you kind of get to the next level of okay, now you're producing profit. Now you're investing money not only in the marketing, right, to continue growing the business. Now you're investing money in R&D, research and development, coming up with new ideas, and adding, once you have your core business unit set, right? So for us as car insurance, once car insurance is working really well and it's standalone profitable as a line, and that business is generating sufficient profits, well, you can then use those profits from that business to invest into other products that you can potentially sell. And some of those ideas may fail, but that's how Amazon went from books to cloud, right? Like they probably funded a bunch of experiments that failed, and then they hit one that was even more lucrative and more powerful than their original business. And then they've continued to do that in probably what is the most successful textbook example, in the history of all businesses, I would venture to say, Amazon. So I think you can look at that experimentation at different scales. That's at the company level. But there's the unit economics, then there's the line, and then there's the company. So you don't need your company to be profitable from day one, although if you can get it there, great. You first need to make sure that the unit that you sell, your unit economics, is profitable, right? Because believe it or not, you can be in a situation if you sell sweaters where every time you sell a sweater, you sell it for less than you make. Okay, your unit economics are bad. You have to focus on the economics at the scale of the unit. Then once you fix the unit economics, then you have to work on the line economics, okay? So in other words, okay, so the sweater that you sell, you can sell it for a profit. Now you take a step back and you focus on all the costs associated with running that business. So you have personnel, you have office space, you have shipment and all that stuff. Just because you sell one sweater profitably doesn't mean you're making enough to pay for all the people and the things and the costs that are associated with selling that sweater. So unit economics, then if you're selling that profitably enough, can you sell enough sweaters to pay for everything that is helping to produce that, right? And then ultimately, you can then zoom out even further and begin to take bets at the line level and invest in other ancillary lines that help multiply those streams of income within the company itself, if that makes sense. So I would say that we're somewhere between the unit and the line economics. We've spent a lot of time optimizing our unit economics. We know them well. We're constantly tweaking them. We know what those unit economics are, and we're now moving into line economics. Let's now sell in, now that we know how much we net per policy really, really well with certainty, what's the amount that you have to sell at this profit margin in order to offset the cost of the entire rest of the operation. So that's the goal for all of 2024, honestly, is to get to that profitability point. But that takes time and it takes execution. And one of the things that helps you get there is being cost optimized in the first place, having more dollars, the things that we just talked about, to invest in marketing and all that kind of stuff. So I could say that today we have finished mapping out the rest of the year. And, frankly, I'm satisfied with that because it is, it's January 22nd. I think we started doing this stuff in probably late Q4 into Q1. And, before the end of the first month, we have the rest of the month more or less set in terms of the roadmap, in terms of initiatives. The further out you get, the hazier your vision gets in a startup, I would say, and just in general. So I would say the next 2 quarters in particular are very, very high certainty. And then the next quarter after that, we have an idea. You don't have to have everything mapped out like crazy. And in fact, the younger you are as a business, the less visibility you're going to have. So if you're just starting, probably having your next quarter mapped out is enough. And even just your next month being super clear your next month and somewhat hazy over the next quarter is okay. The bigger you grow, now that we're bigger, we think in terms of probably 3 quarters. 2 quarters high confidence, 1 quarter hazy, but you have an idea. Then as you grow bigger, some companies have 2 years of certainty in their planning, and maybe another 2 years on top of that that are hazy but directionally clear, and so on. So as you can see, everything comes in levels, okay? There's your economics from the company to the line to the unit. There's your planning from, if you're at maturity, years. If you're subscale, probably quarters. And if you're fledgling, probably months, right? So everything depends. And the tricky thing about this whole game is once you've mastered planning for months, you probably have grown into planning for quarters. You got to flex that muscle. By the time you figure it out, it's on to the next, and it's on to the next, and so on. But yeah, I feel good. Rest of the year planned out with some confidence, and from here on out, we can stop the debating around whether we're going to do this or that. And unless things come up, we can deal with them. But for the most part, not only are we now directionally clear, we're also tactically, strategically clear. And it's time to go execute the game plan. So feeling pretty good. And with that, we'll call it a vlog. And that's kind of, a big win for me on a Monday morning. Peace.